Like all of us, we all had a starting point. And how many in the room actually started and floundered their way along until they came across the club? We certainly did. And then once the penny drops, you go from strength to strength. And as Jeff said, it's all about taking ownership and education. And we are a unique club. There is nobody in Australia and pretty much nobody in the world that offers you what the property club does. But we are a secret. We are a secret. And in the world today, there is so many other wannabes, little that come along and want to be property investment companies and that. We need to get the word out there that if they want to invest, they need to invest with the best. And who is the best? Property club. So remember that. And following on from that, we are also looking at, were the people that were here last year that came to see Bernard Salt? How many people heard Bernard Salt last year? Fantastic speaker, wasn't he? Bernard Salt's talking about in today's age where people are looking, they want to be in lifestyle. So he had lots of graphs and everything like that to show us the lifestyle. Now remember, I don't know how many people saw his little note on LinkedIn. So with the information age today, everything is at our fingertips. We have to sort through all this information to make sure that we're getting to the nitty-gritty and we can focus on what we're doing. So with Bernard Salt, he was saying that his reference to the smashed avocado that is in the booklet is that he was saying that young people are complaining that they can't get into the market and that they can't afford property. How many people do we have in the Young Investors Club in the room today? Put your hand up. Yeah, we have 5 children. They're all investors as well. So it's not impossible. What he was referring to is that if young investors were focusing and not spending their money on going out to have breakfast at the coffee club and having smashed avocado on their rye bread, if they focused on what they were after, looking for the bigger picture, keeping their eye on the bigger picture and focusing on what they really want, then getting a property for them is not beyond them. So this is where the club can help them. We are now seeing the second generation of members coming through. The parents are bringing their kids to the club to get them going. And the Young Investors Club is certainly a great forum for that, so to get people into the club as well. So just spread the word. Spread the word. So we're going to actually run through some of Bernard's information from last year and what his social trends were and the social trends of the new age, knowing where to invest for future growth. What is it that our tenants are going to be wanting in the future? Those that were on the bus run yesterday, we had a very big eye-opener. So what is it that tenants want? They want the best. They want to live on the $1 million lifestyle but only pay a budget rent. So this is the type of thing that they're looking for. So I'd like to invite Kevin and Troy to come up and actually run through some of Bernard's comments and discuss and maybe have some Q&A about, what is it that Bernard Salt was talking about, where is our market going into the future and how we're going to make sure that we're targeting the right market. Because the property that we're after, we want location and position. We want to be where the tenants are going to be. So we need that going in. And we have Clifford as well. Excellent. 3 brains.
Testing.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Can we have the handheld? Thanks. Yep. And the pointer, please.
Right. I noticed yesterday we ran the Bernard Salt thing through in its entirety along with my Burris in its entirety. But most people went out looking at property, which you've been congratulated on. But we thought we'd run this a bit here today for those that would have missed out on yesterday. It looks like as you've all missed out on yesterday, you don't know what we're talking about. So Bernard Salt is a demographer. He knows where people are moving and what the future people are going to want in a property. So it's like putting the horse in front of the cart rather than the other way around. Work out what you're buying today is relevant. Now we did this back before we started the club. We did Kathy and I, probably about 18 months of researching what was in the mind of tenants and wealthy owners as they were getting older, what they wanted. And we quickly worked out that they didn't want to drive for half an hour from the city to a quarter-acre block and have the weekend ruined for their wife watching her mow the lawn. They want to look after their wife and said, don't mow the lawn, darling. What we really want is want to live closer to where the action is. So right from the get-go, we really focused on near-city units and townhouses where they could really walk to the bus stop to get to work or the train or go to the cinemas or whatever. And that's really what Bernard said in his talk, that people are really moving away, and he said those people who are buying houses in the middle ring will soon find that as the next generation gets to buy and live in them, they won't want them, because they won't want to be so far away from where the action is. They don't want a big backyard to mow, and they want the units and townhouse lifestyle.
And Kevin, just on that point, so with the first slide that we've got there from Bernard, you can see it over there as well. The blue areas are where the winners are for population growth, and the red is where it's slightly where it's negative. And you can see most of our population growth has been driven by the lifestyle areas along the coast. So that's really verified through there as well. The next slide is pretty interesting, where it looks at what's the common denominator between our high growth cities. Oops, yep, and there. Okay, so we've got here from the 50s through to the mid 2000s as we are now, 2014, and the projections through to 2050. You have a look at this final column and showing where the percentage growth actually is. And the percentage growth is there for Brisbane, the Gold Coast Tweed area, Queanbeyan area of Canberra, and Melbourne as well. So those lifestyle areas, that common denominator, Kevin, as you said, is just verifying what you were saying there.
I told you Michael should have stayed. He would have learned a lot.
He would have. So that was what we had on that side. And do you have anything to add, Clifford, on that, just about where our population is growing in those areas?
Yeah, I think, the demographic shift, there's lots of sort of layers to that. People moving from other countries to Australia, people moving out of the very expensive Sydney and Melbourne environment into perhaps other locations that are more attractive and offer a better lifestyle. But I've always said, if you can own a property within 20 to 30 minutes of the centre of the city, those property prices are going to appreciate a lot, because more and more people are going to want to avoid public transport and the clog of congestion on our roads, and they're just going to be well and truly over that. So not only are we seeing a real shift in terms of younger people wanting to be in the centre of the city, but we're also seeing a shift in terms of retirees. It's amazing in Sydney and Melbourne at the moment. There's a lot of interest from retirees to live in the inner city, because our inner city areas at the moment are now so rich culturally, with galleries, different theatres, the opera, the ballet, or various concerts of various kinds, that retired people are finding it's quite actually stimulating to be within walking distance of all these activities and live a high quality of life just in the middle of town, and they get to see their kids more often as well.
Yeah, very good point, Clifford, thanks. The next slide that we've got coming up talks about how multicultural our society is today. And that's again what's driving that growth and that demand in those areas as we're talking through. Kevin, your view on the multiculturalism of where the country's going, and therefore, as I covered in my slide earlier, about the growth that we're having from that, the demand.
I think it's a great idea, because being an old fart, I grew up where we would go out and we'd have fish and chips or a mixed grill, and that's all the local cafe provided. Now there's just a huge array of food, and I do like my food. And that's thanks to multiculturalism, so it's good. It's making our cities diverse. One interesting statistic my son gave me is that the Muslims produce a lot more offspring than we're used to here in Australia. And that's going to be an interesting demographic in itself, because we don't make units and townhouses big enough for an expanding family. I think they said the average number of children they have is about 9. Well, boy, we don't sort of cater for that. So if that's going to be a rising demographic, we have to look at going back to where we were in the 50s with big houses out on the suburban blocks again. So I appreciate the information you sent me there, Harper. We'll have to look at that a bit hard. It could change things around a bit.
Yeah, very good. There was the next point you were covering on.
What Bernard pointed out was that the movement of the Mediterranean type migrants into Australia changed the way we built houses. And we just walked straight into the lounge room, and then you saw the dining room and then your kitchen. They came out and said, well, you live in the same Mediterranean climate that we do, which is great, temperate climate. You should have a lot of outdoor living moving into the internal space. And that really expanded, didn't it? Our backyard barbecue idea and the covered areas leading into the houses, and then started to make the houses a bit bigger. So there's been a Mediterranean influence coming in from these people coming into the country, how we designed our houses, and now how we design our units as well. As Carol said, our people are now demanding much more upmarket finishes to the units than they ever had. When Kathy and I started, I remember one of the early builders said, well, why do all this stuff that you want? Because you're only going to put a spongy tenant in it anyway. Now, we were saying we want bigger balconies, we want microwaves where they can see it rather than being up there or down near their knees. We wanted bigger living areas, we wanted better quality carpets and kitchens and so forth. But people were building dog boxes, in my opinion, little cave, little tiny things, thinking it's just for tenants. But we said, no, it's not just for tenants now, the market's expanding. As Clifford said, there's a lot of retirees coming back in that don't want the big backyard, don't want the big long drive to the city, but they want quality. And that's where our resale value is really coming into its own. We build, insist we get solid construction. And I was going for a drive in Adelaide there with Robert and Parkinson. And I said, the argument's come up, do we accept lesser construction, like lightweight, or stick to our demand for solid construction? And is Robert in the audience there somewhere? Good on you, mate. What did you say?
We propose to all of our members that solid construction is what we're after. Anything with lightweight we don't want because of the ingress of, or possible ingress of water. And in Adelaide, they're really battling to sell anything that's not solid construction. So that's what those people are looking for when they're buying into state.
And Robert, you also said that that's a point of difference with us is that people you were talking to didn't know what lightweight construction was. So they could very well pay a lot of money for something that is lightweight, not know it's lightweight, until they run into those water problems. Another problem I find too is you don't get the capital growth out of lightweight construction because it looks ratty and tatty a lot earlier than good solid brick or block that we recommend.
There's some new lightweight going up there now, Kevin, and exactly it. All new properties, water damage everywhere.
Yep. So I guess that's education. That's why we're here, is to get educated on what is the right sort of properties to buy and what's the right sort of funding for it as well, and looking on into the future. And you just don't get this anywhere else. I think Janine Masters said it too and reminded me that when we're over Norfolk Island, we're actually increasing everyone's IQ for property in the club. As all this information comes in, it increases our IQ. So I feel smart now. Thank you, Janine.
Okay, we've got, just skip past this one. Bit of language in this one that was from Bernard, so I'll just keep going on that. Okay, one of the biggest questions that we get as property mentors, branch managers and members is what type of tenants are we going to be getting in our properties? And when you see this chart come up here, so you see for the 10-year period in 2004 to 14, Australia grew by about 3.6 million people. For the next 10-year period, which we're in at the moment, 2014 to 2024, we're on track to growing by 4.2 million people. So when you look at that, you see where that growth is coming, and most of it is around the young adults to families. When you see the orange line in the middle of there, your 30s to 44s, And that's a really clear demographic that we're seeing when our leasing department are getting tenants for members in the properties. The properties that we're getting are attracting executive style tenants who are paying upwards of $400 to $500 a week rent. With respect, that's not $200 a week rent, and it's not $800 a week rent. Kevin, we've always talked about getting the median price of the suburb, the area and the street, and that then attracts the most people for tenancies, etc. Can you talk to that a little more, please?
Yeah, I think we told people to avoid the bottom end of the market completely. I call it the maggot market, and what did Rail call it? The duffer market or something or other. You're always going to have the worst sort of tenants, and they're not going to respect the place because the previous tenant didn't. There's oil stains on the carpet, or the carpet's ratty-tatty and has to be replaced. We've got a place up the Sunshine Coast that someone came to me this morning and said, well, the fascia needs a repaint and this needs to be done. Well, we said straight away, yeah, go ahead and do that. So it'd be useless doing that if it was in a maggot market area because you wouldn't get the return on, you wouldn't get the rent on that investment. And so you don't get the capital growth because the whole area gets a bit coloured by that type of capital growth restriction. We look at the middle market because we know that it's going to be a good area, good solid rental, and if it's not, we don't recommend it. Like I said before, we learn everything from the tenant. And if it's a good quality area and the tenant's pushing the rent up, that's the tenant telling us there's a shortage of stock in the area. However, having said that, once you've got a number of properties, I like to move into the top end of the market periodically because the top end of the market will always go up greater than that middle bracket. But equally, when it comes down, it will come down greater than that middle bracket. But when you're in there for the long term, like I said this morning, the reason that happens is that if you've got a $1.5 million property, you can afford to knock $200,000 off the price because you probably only paid $800,000 for it. So when it goes up really quickly. When it comes down, it appears to come down a lot, but only because people can afford to discount it. When you're in the middle market and you've paid $550,000 for your property, then if you're going to distress sell or want to sell, you're not going to take $200,000 off the price because you're going to be negative with the bank. So the beauty about the upper end of the market, if you time it right, you can get in when that upswing is coming and just be prepared to handle that downswing. We bought on Chevron Island, 1.4 million. At one stage in this Rudd financial crisis, it dropped down to about 900. So now it's back up to 1.4, and with this surge on the coast, I reckon we'll get up to over about 2.2 by 2019. Opposite, I must say this in relation to the Gold Coast, opposite what Michael said, he feared the market would be flat after the Commonwealth Games. I said that to Tom Tate, and it's on the video if you want to have a look at it. And he said, why did you say that? And I said, it always happens in all the areas around the world when they've had a Commonwealth Games or Olympic Games. The real estate rises before it and then flattens off or drops a bit after it. And he said, yes, because they're returning back to a normal market that it was before, but they've got all the oversupplied properties from the housing the athletes and all the amenities that go with it. He said, it's different here on the Gold Coast. He said, because where we've got the athletes housed, it's not competing with the normal housing. The places they're living in aren't suitable for anything other than commercial or light industrial type use post the games, and it's over in that commercial and industrial area for that very reason. He said, but the big thing that's going to happen is, and it's my job, he said, is to make sure there's a lot of continual new businesses pouring into the Gold Coast, and because of the attraction of the Commonwealth Games, he's finding a lot of businesses coming down from Asia saying, we can halve the cost of our labour force if we took them out of Beijing or Hong Kong and house them on the Gold Coast. I'd love to work here for half price because the climate's better. They could finish work at 5 o'clock and they could be in the surf in 30 seconds and back again. So he says, I think we're going to have a lot more employment pouring into the coast post the games that these other places haven't had. And also he's looking at putting a pier out so all the ships can come into the pier because the Labor government won't let them use Waybreak Island. The previous government had approved it but hadn't signed off on it. Because all the MPs on the Gold Coast are Liberal National Party, the Labor Party won't let them go ahead with that thing. But Tom Tate, being a bit dynamic, he's come up with that they can't stop him putting a pier right out from Waybreak Island and the cruise ships come in, discharge and go out and drop anchor. And the cruise ships prefer that because they haven't got to pay 12 hours of steaming to go up around the top of Bribie Island and pay for a pilot to come back in to berth at 4 a.m. in the morning. So their costs are going to be a lot less. They'll come there a lot more. The people will pour off, not to go up to Brisbane, but they'll pour off to use the Gold Coast nightlife on the night, go back to the ship, go up next day and go and see the Wells and the hinterland and all that sort of stuff. So I'm very positive about the Gold Coast post-Commonwealth Games.
I would like to second Kevin's comments about the Gold Coast. I actually strongly forecast that the property market on the Gold Coast will barely notice the Olympic Games being over. The Commonwealth Games being over. It will just be, won't even be a blip, because what's happening to the Gold Coast isn't happening because of the Commonwealth Games. The Commonwealth Games are just this small northern end event on what's happening in the property market up and down the Gold Coast. And I know for a fact that people are finding it very difficult to find rental properties. People are getting really desperate. I know of at least 2 cases where potential renters actually wanted to pay 10% more rent, even without looking at the property, and still missed it. Okay, so the property market on the Gold Coast has now reached breaking point.
Prices levels, they're saying,
and about 2 years ago, I said property prices would be up 20% by 2020. So that was in 2015, and it's well and truly on that track. And it's a coming of age. I'm a big believer in regions or nations reaching what I call a critical mass, or their 21st birthday effect, where they become self-fulfilling driving engines. You know, we saw it happen with China on a far more massive scale, and we're just seeing, you know, the Gold Coast in the last few years reach this different cultural point where, in terms of demographics, you know, people can actually get a good coffee. Now, this is very important to people from the south, and what the Gold Coast used to experience was people moving up from the south, staying for 2 years, moving back. Now they're moving up and staying, and they're getting their children places. The universities, the medical centres, the medical science developments that are going to replace where the Commonwealth Games are happening, actually. One of the world's leading sort of medical research centres are going to be placed there. The whole Gold Coast, they're even trying to get, you know, some of the Ivy League universities out of the United States to have campuses on the Gold Coast. So they're really driving that intelligent industry now, overlaying tourism. So the demand for property on the Gold Coast will not notice the end of the Commonwealth Games.
No, it won't abate. And looking at this slide that we've got coming up here, showing where Australia's life cycles are now. If you have a look back in the 30s, so people were children and then adults for a long time, and then the life expectation wasn't that much. So life expectation then was in the 60s. In the 70s, we had teenagers that went through that cycle, adults, old, and the life cycle's been around 70. Now in our current generation, we've got people going through adolescence, kids, adults, lifestyle, and then they're wanting to leave work earlier for lifestyle, and that's what's driving this in these regions and areas. And then they're retired, and then they're getting older. That's why, as we were talking about earlier as well, looking at what we need to try for that, because if you look at that grey line there of the adults, sorry, I didn't come up. If you look at that grey line there for the adults and see that there's not as much time left for the working life in the period that's there. So how are they going to earn enough to put enough aside for retirement? Which is why investing and putting aside that way and using leverage really is one of the most powerful strategies you can take. Because not being political about it, but the government, whichever government's in charge at the moment, they're not going to have that much money to put up you and I in retirement.
The problem is that people have been made to feel nice and safe and comfortable by all those superannuation ads that says, you know, when I retire, I'm going to have $230,000 and they're only going to have $210,000. They don't mention that when you do retire, $210,000 will pay the rent for 2 years or 3 years, that's all. And they don't realise that until they get about 10 years away from retirement, and then panic sets in that they haven't got enough. They might have 1 or 2 investment properties, and they might have $100,000 worth of shares, and that's a typical sort of scene that we get coming to us. And they don't panic, and they're in their 20s and 30s. I was panicking when I was 8 that I couldn't afford a property. These guys, I don't know, I just don't understand it. And I think this is where the rich get richer, because you're instilling on your heirs and people you know that they've got to get in early, and they do get in early, and they do end up wealthy. But it's the people out there that don't know that, can't educate the people And I think that this afternoon we might be talking about grey hairs. It's Chris Garlick's talk on the ways that you can use your assets or your parents' assets or your uncle's assets to get you started into increasing your properties, or if you're short on assets but you've got an income, you can still work that method as well. So it's all about education and, Janine, increasing our property IQ.
Thank you. And just one of these next slides is coming up as well, and most of us know this anyway. But back in the 50s, we had 2 or 3 bedrooms in the house and the bathroom outside, and that was the size of it and the details. In today's structure, there's alfresco areas, there's bedrooms, there's internet-connected devices, it's all cabled. It's the smart home, it's the new generation that people need to be connected that way, and that again doesn't come in overnight. That requires more around the area. Just
We've got to go soon, but if I can just put a question to Clifford. One of the things that Bernard said was the safety factor of Australia in affecting ongoing property prices.
Well, yeah, Australia is, I mean, we all know it. Australia is, the best country in the world. But it's also considered by people, and one of the reasons we have such strong immigration, I think 5% last year, the equivalent of 5% of our population was immigration last year. So if you think there's going to be any if there's any property bubble, that immediately dismisses that whole argument of there being any sort of property bubble. So Australia it's not only seen as a refuge, it's seen as a refuge that is actually a better way of life. And I'm a big believer too that we're going to see a big push out of China and other Asian countries in terms of air quality. People just wanting to have good health. I mean, just basic good health by being able to breathe clean air, clear air, are going to want to move to Australia as well. And I've already seen some anecdotal evidence of that, but it's obviously not a question asked by statistics yet. But increasingly, it's not just beaches and way of life, but it's also, I want some space and some fresh air to grow. So the immigration flow is going to continue to zoom upwards.
We're in the right place at the right time.
Yeah, and just in closing, this is a really interesting slide, as you can see there. So this shows where the business and jobs growth opportunities are across the next few decades. And just from everything we've covered, you can see that's clearly around healthcare, social assistance, professionals, teaching, construction, etc. Some of the properties, for example, that we've got around Brisbane that some of you might have seen yesterday, Stafford, Lutwyche, Chermside, Southport, all around health precinct areas where there's a lot of demand and growth for. It's really rare to see a shopping centre get closed down. It's really rare to see a hospital get closed down because we need those requirements moving forwards. So those properties in those areas is the summary that Kevin, Clifford and I wanted to go through with you on. They are really red hot areas for growth because there's going to be constant demand for that because of the reasons we covered earlier.
We're short of time now to take any questions, but if you do have any questions, you can write them down. And Melanie here? Melanie not here? Anyway, write them down and just put them up on the stage. Whoever's MC for the day, just put the questions down and we'll know to have a question and answer session then and cover all that for you. So I'm sorry we've run out of time. You're a great audience. You asked very intelligent questions and we couldn't answer them. We've got to go.
We've got to go. Thank you all.
Thank you.